Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Movies After Midnight, where we are kicking off Mummy March Madness. We will primarily be focusing this month on the beloved Brendan Frasier centric Mummy series, but as you may or may not know, 1999's The Mummy was based off a 1932 Universal horror classic, and I felt it was only appropriate to kick off this sort of deep dive by talking about the original classic itself. And so we're gonna be looking at that today. And right out the gate, I do want to. Normally, I kind of walk through things piece by piece, but I do. So when you talk about old movies, you are talking about movies that exist in societies and value systems that are like. I mean, I'd like to say that we don't have anymore. That's debatable, but that are clearly much more. You'll find things that you object to that maybe people didn't object to as much back then, and it can get dicey. And I wanted to point out a couple of things just beforehand so that we're not, because there are things I think this movie does well, but I wanted to like give time to like be like, yeah, they did these things and they probably shouldn't have. Let me see, because there were a couple. So first of all, it's The Mummy is a film about archaeologists and everything, and there's already a whole, kind of dialogue about that. A whole like, not dialogue, but like, the ethicality of like people, usually white people, going to other cultures and like taking their stuff and breaking into their historical monuments and all that. That's a whole, like, already that's being used thematically, and so like that. In terms of an adventure film, it's, as far as this film goes, that's not like a horrible overtone. Like, there is even some discussion about it, like not like deep discussion, but considering when the movie was made, we'll get to that. There's a lot of you saw this a lot in westerns of the time too, but like actors that are characters that should be not white being played by actors who are white and are made up to not look white, and that's a big oof. Though I do want to say, at least some of the people, like a lot of the supposedly Arabic people in this movie, they didn't look white to me, so like they might have done better with that in this movie. Like, I can't say, but there were definitely a couple people where I was like, I'm not sure. And primarily, and I mean, you do have plot points where, like, the brown guys are doing all the heavy lifting while the the white characters kind of kick back, although that, like, as uncomfortable as that is, that's kind of how, like, I feel like a lot of those excavations would have gone. So like, that's a whole other can of worms. Primarily, and this was kind of the mummy in this film, Imhotep. I guess to give some background to this film, production wise, it was basically made as a follow up to Dracula's success. And like, on a structural level, it is very much the same story as Dracula, where you have a monster coming back and possessing these powers of hypnosis to kind of make people do his bidding. That's like one thing Dracula did, but both him and Imhotep in The Mummy 1932 make use of that pretty heavily. And I noticed as I was writing, I was like, oh, it's funny he only ever like hypnotizes people who aren't white, and then I found out that there's a story reason for that, but that makes it so much worse. So there's this like house servant guy in the film that Imhotep hypnotizes and gets him to like do his bidding and take some stuff and kill a guy and everything, and they're looking at things afterwards, and the doctor's like, oh, he was a Nubian, so because Imhotep like had power over his people, he has power over him. And I'm like, that's, for lack of a better term, that's kind of fucked up. And like, I just wanted to like point these things out because I feel like to not point them out would be kind of disingenuous. Um, and like again, there are like I'm gonna get into there are reasons you would want to watch this movie, but like it's one of those things. We talked about that a little on when I was on Aaron's podcast, and we did. I can never remember the Bond movie names, but it was the one where they kind of like took a lot of blaxploitation cues, starring Yaphet Kotto, R.I.P. Yaphet, and like that movie was it got into problematic territory, and we kind of discussed that how like even when there are parts you like about a film. And then even one singular thing, like that kind of like in terms of like race depiction stuff that rears its head, it kind of it can kind of ruin the whole little bit of leaven's the whole lump, as they say. I don't know if that analogy applies here, but yeah. Again, I just wanted to mention that before I got into all these other things because it stood out, and like I wouldn't want to like tell people to watch this movie and then have them see that themselves and be like, oh wow, I am really like uncomfortable or put off by that. I mean, which like you probably would be, but you know what I'm saying. Like I just yeah. So now that we've discussed that, going back, this film. Again, like it's part of the Universal horror canon, and it's part of that canon for good reason. It was because it's a follow-up to Dracula. It hits a lot of the same story beats, but you can tell Dracula was a film made very early on in the lifetime of talkie pictures, and there are a lot of elements where you can kind of tell that they're still figuring out how to use sound. Like there's a lot of like Dracula is very minimal on score in some places, and it's really weird to me. And I think by the time they were doing The Mummy, they understood certain things about using sound in film a lot better. And I think things like that, they understood things about sound and pacing that they didn't know when they made Dracula or were still figuring out when they made Dracula. And so I think in terms of like structure and pacing, it's a much more polished film. Also, it is sort of loosely, and I mean very loosely, inspired by a Bram Stoker novel, a different Bram Stoker novel called, it's like Beneath the Seven Stars or something like that. I can't remember, but it was a story he wrote about. There's a mummy and there's resurrection and reincarnation, and it hits a lot of the same themes, even though the stories are very different. And so I don't know this, but it feels very inspired by that story, and it would make sense that if they were looking to follow up Dracula, that they would look at another Stoker novel. So we begin in, I think, 1922, give or take, and we are introduced to some characters who have are digging up ruins and going through artifacts. There's this younger guy, Edward Van Sloan, actually, another link to Dracula. Edward Van Sloan played Abraham Van Helsing in Dracula, and his character Dr. Muller, I think they say Miller, in this film is basically Dr. Van Helsing. Like, he's the same character, he has the same moments, he has the same like understanding of the kind of arcane side of things. So he's one of these. Actually, I think he comes in later. But there are these three archaeologists. They have found this sarcophagus with a very well-preserved mummy inside, and this chest. And this younger researcher's really intent on opening this chest. And there's kind of this discussion of like, he's like, this could be really, this could be huge. This is exciting. And the older guys are like, yeah, we've been doing this for years, we're just here to learn, chill. And there's some discussion about that, and they read the box, and because there's a British professor and there's a like local professor of some kind, and the local professor's like, yeah, there's still definitely like magic on this stuff that we shouldn't mess with. We should not open these things. And they kind of go outside to have a debate about it. And the younger archaeology student, eventually curiosity gets the best of him. And before they go out, what triggers that argument is they read that like death will come to whoever opens this box. And so the younger archaeologist, he's like, you know what, I'm going to check it out. We do get a line, because they're looking at the sarcophagus, and I think they're like all the protective stuff on it. And I don't know how accurate the idea of etching stuff into the sarcophagus was, but I know in ancient Egypt there was the idea of like doing things to like make sure that whoever was buried had a safe journey to the afterlife. And they're like, oh, all that stuff has been wiped off. Someone really didn't like this guy. And the younger professor's like, oh, maybe he got a little too intimate with the Vestal Virgins. And like it's one of those lines that reminds you that this was definitely a pre-code film. If you're not up on film history, there's a term I got absolutely sick of in film school because you hear it all the time when you discuss old movies. Basically, I can't remember exactly the year, but there was something called the Hays Code that was introduced. That was like it basically set down this series of laws that basically like if you wanted to be, endorsed and supported and everything, your film had to adhere to these things and not do these things. And it was a very like exacting list of like, you can't not only can you not show sex, you also can't do anything that would hint at them having sex, which is where we get that like gag trope of like married couples sleeping in separate beds, or you can't hint at this, no homosexuality. If you depict gangsters, they need to like die or somehow like suffer so that they're not depicted in too positive a light, and all this stuff. And that really that didn't start to give way until the late 50s, or I think sometime in the 60s actually. But it's been too long, the dates are fuzzy in my head. But so when a lot of people think of the kind of like older films, they expect that kind of code era behavior, and these Universal films, a lot of the older ones like this predate the code by just a little bit, and lines like that kind of remind you that they predate the code, so that's always fun. But basically he opens the chest and he finds some stuff. As he sits down and looks at it, he finds a scroll, and he the scroll has this like spell of resurrection. And did he open? No, you know what? I think they all opened the chest, and he read the. I can't remember exactly how it shakes out, but basically the scroll is read, and while he's alone in this room, the mummy Imhotep, who was buried, comes back to life, and takes the scroll and walks out. And the actor playing this younger researcher, he does such a great job of portraying like actual. It's rare in horror films that you see horror portrayed like that well. Like as someone who's been getting into a lot of horror films, like rarely do I feel like a scream scene like really sells me on what's going on. Like I don't know, it's really hard to like performing fear is very difficult, and this guy like he basically he sees, like, we don't really see the mummy. We have like a pan up shot on him and we see him start to move, and then we have another shot of this researcher sitting there. He looks up, he screams, and then he just starts like laughing, like his brain is completely just snapped from seeing this like, horrifying thing that he never could have expected. And like they come back in on him and he's just laughing like a madman. And like the way the actor portrayed that like switch from screaming to laughing, and like the intensity of it, you really get this sense that he's had this almost like Lovecraftian loss of sanity. And it's one of the most like chilling horror movie moments that I can think of. Especially, like, I remember watching this movie way back when I was very young, and I don't remember a lot of it, but that moment stuck with me. And it's just a really good, like, horror moment. And so then we actually cut ahead by 10 years, and the British researcher has basically, we see his son is now excavating in Egypt, and he has a talk about, like, yeah, ever since that guy went mad 10 years ago, my father just stopped coming out on expeditions. It's weird. And they're looking around, and they haven't him and his partner haven't really found anything, and they are approached by this man who is also played by also played by Boris Karloff, who's credited as playing the Mummy. So you kind of get basically it's, I don't remember when they break this down, but it's pretty obvious from the get-go. Basically, the Mummy has resurrected himself and set himself up as with a modern day pseudonym and everything. And he's going by the name Ardeth Bey, which, if you've watched the 1999 movie, will be familiar to you. And so that was actually one of Stephen Sommers' things about the film, when he was talking about how he wanted to make the Mummy seem really monsterish in the 99 film. He was like, because yeah, for most of the 32 film, it was just Boris Karloff with wrinkles. And actually, this is probably one of the few Universal films where I think Karloff was really able to showcase his acting ability. Because especially, like, being the guy who was known for bringing Frankenstein to life, a lot of times he would end up beneath a lot of makeup, or portraying these kind of, like, simple-minded characters. And this is a film where he really gets to... He had at times Imhotep has shades of Darth Vader in this film, with the, like, again, he has an aura of being kind of very Dracula-esque. In kind of the, he's not a mindless villain. He's an intelligent villain, and he's someone who wields his power very directly. And in terms of performance, this is a really good role for Karloff, I think. Because he's able to kind of flex that side more, when I think he, like I said, a lot of his characters the monsters that he portrayed anyway were a little less, had a little less going on. But also, another side note, talking about, so pretty much all of these movies play it kind of fast and loose with Egyptian mythology. For various reasons, some problematic, some just the state of what people probably knew at the time was different. And one of those things is that Imhotep was also a real life person, and he was actually pretty cool. Like, he was like this really renowned architect, and I want to say he like originated something. Like, he built some of the first, like, some of the, like, really important, like, structures that still stand today. He was, like, involved in their creation, and, like, he was this really cool, really great, like, guy in Egyptian history, and they just named the Mummy after him. So now his name is, like, remembered probably more for that than all his great architectural contributions. So take from that what you will. But getting back to the film, basically Imhotep shows up, and he's like, or Ardeth Bey shows up, and he says, "Oh, I live around here, and I happen to find this artifact near this tomb." And they're like, "Oh, geez, how'd you find that? Why are you giving it to us?" And he mentions that he's not. He's like, locals aren't allowed to dig things up, only foreigners. And so basically, like, for both legal and I think implicitly mystical reasons, he is not allowed to dig up this tomb that he wants into, and so he sort of uses them to get around that. And they find the body of this dead priestess, and of course all these treasures. It's very very King Tut's tomb, and it's this big deal, and they take her back to. Or no, they don't take her back to England. They there's actually an exchange. That's what I was talking about, where the kid's father actually comes out to look at all this stuff, and the kid is like, "Oh, it sucks that they won't let us take all this stuff with us back to Britain," and his father's like, we're here for science, not for treasure, like, and kind of like is basically says like we don't need to take their stuff. And again, in context of the like ethical discussions about like the way archaeologists work in a lot of these movies, that was an interesting line to hear in 32. Like, they didn't really emphasize that, but it's even kind of like give like, maybe I'm giving him too much credit, but it was interesting to me. Yeah, for science, not for loot. But they sort of return to England and are discussing what they found, and they meet as they're going through that. We meet this character named Helen, who is she's the assistant of Dr. Muller from the beginning. Muller? It's spelt Muller, but they said Miller, so I'm she's the assistant of Dr. Miller from the beginning, and her and the main guy have some interactions, and basically Imhotep is there as sort of the benefactor of this, and he basically he kind of zeroes in on her as she turns out to be the reincarnated soul of the woman who of the woman that they dug up, who he is intent on resurrecting. And several times he performs this ritual to like draw her soul to him, and Helen sort of enters this trance state where she like leaves this party, drives to the Museum of Natural History, and is trying to get in to basically answer this call that's taken over her. And that's when the lead character, the lead guy and his father, happen to be driving up to the museum, and they're like, "Hey, what's this lady doing?" And they find her and take her home before Imhotep can get to her. But that sort of establishes this conflict, and again is where we get really into Dracula territory, where you have basically this lead female who's being afflicted by the monster guy, and the main conflict is like relinquishing this hold he has on her. But one of the things I think this film really does better than Dracula is the character of Helen, played by the actress Zita Johann. I think it's Johann. She just comes off as a lot stronger than Mina Harker did in the original film, or in Dracula. And I think a lot of that is just because Zita Johann plays her with this. Even when she's kind of succumbing to Imhotep's control, there's this very like self-assured, almost kind of defiant, like subtle like strength to her character. And so like even though she's in this very like not necessarily helpless, but like de-emphasized role, her attitude kind of shines through and makes this character, like, it makes you invest in her as a character, or at least it did me. And again, when Karloff or when Imhotep realizes it's her, I think he's actually visiting, because he just sent out that spell. He didn't know who was going to respond. And he happens to be visiting them, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's cool. Sorry I couldn't be at the party." They're like, "Oh yeah, we found this girl who was trying to get into the museum," and he's like, "Oh, she was trying to get into the museum. I see." And that's when he kind of fixates on trying to get her, and so basically the rest of the conflict of the film is him kind of continuing to reach out magically and do these things to both get to her and shake these guys off of his trail, because especially Dr. Miller, again, much like Abraham Van Helsing, starts to figure out, because that's what happens. he's doing his spell, this reading this scroll that he took when he was at the start of the film, and he has to leave it behind as he's found out, as those guys showed up to take Helen home, because he was in there, so he didn't want to be caught. And so basically they are in possession of this scroll, and he's trying to both get the scroll back and get her. And Dr. Mueller pretty quickly realizes what's going on, and they have almost the exact same moment that Van Helsing and Dracula have, where he like, I think, pulls out a mirror and like has a cross and stuff, and like where he's like, I know who you are and I know what you're doing, and he's like, oh yeah, well I'll just hypnotize you, and he's like, bet. And like, it's pretty much the exact same moment with the exact same actor, which again, like, it kind of shows you how like everyone involved had time to refine their craft since Dracula was made. Because again, I think there's an energy and a tempo to this film that Dracula didn't always have. Also, I screwed up one of my lashes, and I'm not. Yeah, just don't look at it. But yeah, and again, as the film goes on, Imhotep really starts to feel like Darth Vader as he indirectly mind controls people and uses this magical force to kind of influence things from afar. And eventually he gets Helen to come to him and shows her in this pool. He shows her like what happened, where he was this priest of I can't remember, in the 99 movie he's a priest of Osiris. I can't remember if that came from this or if they added that in, but where she's this priest of Isis and she dies, and he's in love with her, so he is going to resurrect her, but then he's basically found out and punished for attempting to resurrect her, and mummified in this way where he doesn't get any of his wards for the afterlife, and so he suffers this curse and everything. And I discussed that with someone too, how we will talk about this, because that episode definitely hasn't. I definitely recorded these in order, and I'm not doing this last. We will talk about that in The Mummy Returns, how a lot of times Western movies, we tend to put, like, even when we're using different pantheons, we tend to put the energy of like Judeo-Christianity on those pantheons, and like that's kind of one of those things where like the like unnatural dark ritual idea feels very. It feels more like something out of a Catholic framework, but it makes for good cinema, I guess. Where even was I? Okay, so so Imhotep basically shows her past in this hypnotic state, and we as the audience get this story, and he slowly starts kind of awakening her memories of her past life within her, because he's like, yeah, I loved you for 1,000 years, and I want to like resurrect you so we can be together and everything. And this film actually does kind of grapple with reincarnation in ways that I feel like the remakes kind of gloss over, actually, because there is also, they established that Helen is half Egyptian, which, like, her actress is definitely not half Egyptian. I can't remember. I think Zita Johann was from Austrian American actress. Yeah, so not half Egyptian. And also, I'm sorry, I'm going through my notes, so if my thought process is a little non-linear, it's because my notes were very non-linear. There are some shots in this film during the flashbacks where they're like, they they buried him, or they built this tomb, and then they killed the people who built the tomb so that nobody would know where it was. And it shows these guards throwing spears into dudes, and they show the impalement. And again, it really emphasizes that this was a pre-Hays Code film, because they're like showing this gruesome impalement, which is it's a really good effect, all things considered, for the time. And what's funny is they actually Universal made several sequels throughout the 30s and 40s to this film, or follow-ups, I should say. They weren't really sequels. And they used the same footage, but they all kind of skipped around that impalement scene because those films were made during the era of the Code, so they had to they reused footage, but kind of cut around the gnarly part. I want to say that, I think a few of them kept it, and it was really like, dang, I didn't think it would make that in there. But we'll get to that. So we're talking about how Helen is, she starts to kind of grapple by the end of the film. He's taking her to his kind of magic ritual room, and he takes her down and brings back her memories, and they very much distinguish between Helen and the priestess Ankh. In the 99 film they say Ankh Sunamun, but in the 32 movie they do say it differently, and I can't remember how, but it was different, and that confuses my head, so I'll just call her Ankh. But they distinguish between those two characters. Like, she very clearly, like, when the memories of one are activated, she is a different person than when she has the memories of the other. And, like, they don't deal with it a lot, but they deal with it. And I feel like, especially when we'll talk about The Mummy Returns, they don't really deal with the implications of reincarnation as much as, like, There's so much there as a writer, I feel like, to work with, and films never really delve into that like they should. And that actually brings me to the climax of the film. Again, people who are really into Egyptian mythology will probably have issues with just kind of the way it all shakes out. But basically what happens is he takes her and he's like, I'm going to perform this ritual where he sets fire to the mummified body, and he's like, we'll resurrect your old soul in this new body, and then we'll be together and everything. And he's performing this ritual where he's going to kill her, like, basically kill her so he can resurrect her and, like, seal the deal, basically. And she's going along with it, but then as more of her memories start to come back, she's like, wait, no, I'm a priestess. I'm not supposed to take part in these like dark rituals, basically. Which again, like, not really a thing historically, but whatever. And so she prays to Isis, and she's like, what is she? She's like, return the knowledge of, like, the spells you taught me, so I can stop this, basically. And as the male leads, Dr. Miller and generic Universal hero movie guy, I can't remember his name, as they show up, Imhotep basically has them, like, taken care of. Like, he uses his magic dark Jedi powers to hold them at bay, and he pretty much has them on the ropes, and it's her praying to Isis that causes this Isis statue to, like, raise up and, like, basically smite Imhotep and send him back to the grave. So that was really interesting to me, that at the end of the day, the two kind of stock male heroes are basically, like, kind of useless in the grand scheme of things. They don't accomplish a whole heck of a lot. Like Imhotep basically has them beaten at every turn, now that I think about it. And at the end of the day, it's not even the modern woman, it's the woman from the past. And a female deity from outside the Judeo-Christian pantheon, which again, like, is really, like, that's if this film were made a couple years later, I don't know if that's something we would have seen. But it is like, at the end of the day, it's this woman from the past, not even her modern soul, basically, that is the one that kind of puts a stop to all this. And like, after that, she kind of returns to herself. But it's very interesting and kind of neat, like, that at the end of the day, the power was really with this, both a woman and a deity that exist kind of outside the parties that are typically empowered by the ending of these films. And so that, like, that was the one thing that kind of, because like I was talking about, when there's really uncomfortable depictions, like, of minority people, like, it can kind of ruin an entire movie for you. And like that, the way they dealt with that in the ending is like the one thing that I kind of might have saved this movie for me. I don't know if it does, but like, it's just it's something I didn't expect to see. And yeah, as far as like, again, because structurally it's basically like a slightly more polished version of Dracula with mummies in it. So like, whether you want to watch this movie, I think, is very much dependent on what you're looking for. But it like, let it never be said that it's not well done, because it is very well made. And after this, Universal made several more films. I wanted to talk about them, but there's like 5 of them, and I just didn't have the time. What is it? It's like The Mummy's Ghost, The Mummy's Curse, The Mummy's Tomb, something else, and Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. I think it's a Universal movie, so technically it's in there. But what's interesting is all of those films deal with a mummy named Karis, who has no real connection to Imhotep, other than I think they both kind of have that backstory of like they did something bad, they were punished. But with Karis, he's brought back by someone else and sort of used to enact vengeance. Those movies, they kind of originate a lot of slasher tropes, where you have one monster kind of making his way through this list of helpless people. And there are some things in the Stephen Sommers films that I think those films take as much from the Karis movies as they do from the original Imhotep movie. But Karis doesn't get talked about that much, so like I wanted to point that out. And then of course you have the 1959 Hammer film, because Hammer was kind of doing all the Universal monsters, where you have Christopher Lee playing the Mummy and Peter Cushing playing. I'm not sure if he plays Dr. Muller or if he just kind of fills the same role, but Peter Cushing being an absolute lad. And I haven't seen those films, but they look pretty solid. Like they're Hammer films, so you kind of know what you're signing up for. They're Hammer films made before like I don't know. There was a period where Hammer films got kind of jank, but like those Dracula movies set in the after the Dracula movies moved into the modern era, they got kind of rough. We'll talk about that later. But that's getting sidetracked. So basically, this 1932 film has never had a real sequel. But basically, every Mummy film that is attempted to retell its story kind of starts anew, and so that's really interesting. Also, that it's had this lasting influence despite I feel like of the Universal monsters, like especially before like the film in like 99 and stuff. I feel like the Mummy was kind of not the first Universal monster people thought of. You have Frankenstein, you have Dracula, the Wolfman, even Creature from the Black Lagoon probably, and like thinking of things like was there a mummy in the Monster Squad? I don't know. But like it certainly wasn't there like a film, but like it still had this really lasting impact, and I think it was done really well, especially again Boris Karloff and Zita Johann both like delivering really solid performances. and so it's yeah. Yeah, uncomfortable stuff aside, it is really well done, and it makes sense that it had this kind of impact that sort of continued to this day. And like, I feel like it sort of, you don't see mummy movies that often now that I think about it. Like, aside from the ones I mentioned, there's always kind of a boom. Like when in '99 there was, of course, the Mummy, that we will talk about. There was Russell Mulcahy's Tale of the Mummy. There was an actual attempt at, it was called like Bram Stoker's The Mummy, and it was an actual adaptation of that, beneath the, whatever that's called. Let me check what that book is called. Okay, The Jewel of the Seven Stars. And I think there were a couple movies based on that. But like in the interim, it seems like it's pretty much just sequels to the Universal Mummy, and that's about it. But there's always that one series that kind of like enthralls a new generation with like ancient Egypt and ancient Egyptian literature. Because I feel like for me, like for at least my generation anyway, you were either, you either had a dinosaur phase or you had an ancient Egypt phase, and I was an ancient Egypt phase kid. And I think for all its problems, this film was really the start of that kind of legacy in popular culture, where there was always at least something that existed, and maybe it didn't depict things properly, but it depicted enough to get a lot of people like myself really interested in learning more. And so I guess I guess that's a legacy feels like an odd term to use, but I guess that's something this film left behind also. But yeah, that was The Mummy from 1932. And yeah, I just wanted to discuss it as it kind of laid the groundwork for the trilogy that we will be discussing in the weeks to come. I'll have Nick with me for all of those, so you won't just hear me like rambling and getting really sidetracked. Yeah, I hope you guys will join me again. I hope to be in the near future also uploading our old Gentlemen Prefer Cinephiles era episodes as sort of archival stuff. So if you're new to the podcast, we actually have been around for a little while, just not as our own podcast. But yeah, if you're new to the Movies After Midnight family, you can look forward to those to kind of catch up on what we've done in the past. And yeah, we will continue Mummy March Madness for the next few weeks, and I hope to see you guys then. So I will talk to you next time.